Hi, I'm Tyson Franklin, and welcome to this week's episode of the Podiatry Legends Podcast. The podcast designed to help you feel, see, and think differently about the podiatry profession. With me today is Steve Jackson. Steve is a 1995 Western Australian graduate. He exclusively treats MSK issues in patients. But about 10 or 15 years ago, he made a shift away from custom-made orthotics and now does most of the things using semi-custom foot orthotics. So, Steve, welcome to the podcast, and I am really looking forward to talking about this.
Thank you, Tyson. Thanks for having me on.
And before I go any further, I just want to comment, I love your hairstyle.
Yeah, well, we match. People could mistake us as brothers.
No, we were talking about it off air just about, I said to someone recently, I said, even if I could grow all my hair back again tomorrow, I would probably keep it at like a number 2 or number 3 anyway. I said, because, geez, it makes life easy.
It's the simplest hairstyle, I think. Yeah, I think the lowest maintenance hairstyle you can have.
I know my wife will be going, oh, we're going to be leaving in 15 minutes. I said, not a problem. I'm just going to go and jump in the pool first.
Yep.
And I'll jump in the pool, get out, polish my head, bang, I'm ready to go.
So, ready to go. Just got to be aware of the glare when we have our photos taken. That's the only thing.
Oh, the glare, and the people watching the video, they see, yeah, my head's
That's
always
right.
shining in my YouTube videos.
We'll get reflections off each other.
Yes, I know. So anyway, the Steve Jackson story. I'm always interested. What got you into podiatry? Everyone seems to come in. Some are similar, but I think everyone has their own unique story. Why podiatry?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. I get asked that by patients all the time, and I say the same thing. Like, I never even knew what podiatry was until about, I think it was about 2, maybe 3 months before I became enrolled. So I was always interested in, I actually wanted to be a phys ed teacher. And my human bio teacher in, I think it was year 11, year 12, told me, you'll only be able to teach kids to kick footies for so long, and then you'll get bored. He said, you need to do something different. And I actually bumped into him. He's actually good plays at my golf course now. So I was telling him that story not so long ago. But yeah, my dad found it in a book one day and said, oh, do you reckon you'd like this? And I was like, oh, sounds okay. Went down to the uni open day, saw it, and thought, yeah, we'll give it a go. And a couple of months later, I was enrolled, and I never looked back. I kind of liked it right from the start. But I had never even heard of what a podiatrist was, which was interesting because one of the girls I used to carpool with uni, she had wanted to be a podiatrist since she was a kid, and I had no idea. And when we graduated, she hated it and got out of the profession within about 6 months, and I'm still doing it. So
that's funny.
Interesting.
I think it's interesting though that like you knew nothing about it, and I think a lot of people who have thought about, I've always wanted to be a podiatrist, were probably exposed to it, somewhere either through another family member or they had an issue themselves. And I know a lot of people have done podiatry because they saw a podiatrist for a specific issue, fixed them, got them back into sport, and then went, bang, this is why I want to do it.
Yeah, and I never had anything like I should have done, because I look back now and I would have had probably some degree of compartment syndrome or something at some stage when I was playing soccer, and I've got neuromas now, so I've had heaps of foot problems throughout my life, which is a good practice treating yourself. But never saw one, never knew what one was, and then became one.
Well, I was pretty much the same. I was in I repeated grade 12 because I was going to be an art teacher. Okay. And then my brother said, no, do something in the health field. Okay. So went back, repeated grade 12, did all the right subjects. And then a friend of mine that I went through school with from grade 1 all the way through to grade 12. And then he went off to uni. He just happened to be at the school the day I was filling in my preferences. I said, so Lyndon, what are you doing? He goes, podiatry. What the hell's that?
Yeah.
And when he told me what it was, he goes, oh, and we make these things called orthotics that go into shoes. He said, with your art background, you would absolutely love doing these. That's what got me into podiatry.
Yeah, okay. That's interesting.
So it's funny that we're actually going to be talking about custom-made orthotics as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But we're going to get onto that a little bit later. People got to hang around first and hear a bit more about your story. What was your journey through to where you are now? Where do you start?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was obviously, I played lots of sport myself, so I was always interested more in sports side of it. Once I saw that was there, and I was really fortunate in that in our second year as podiatry students, we had a lecturer who lectured us in sports podiatry called Ian Lowther, and he was at the time he was a podiatrist for the West Coast Eagles football team over here, and this was in 1994. Fremantle Football Club was just starting. Their first year was the following year. And he moved in and became the physio, because he was a physio and a podiatrist. And he moved in and became the physio for the Dockers new team. And because he was lecturing us in sports podiatry, he needed a group of sports trainers. And so he asked all of the second year group if any of us would be interested in being sports trainers for this new AFL club.
That was clever.
I knew nothing about AFL. I watched the Eagles play, but I never played footy apart from kicking the footy around at school.
Yeah.
Was always mad keen soccer player. And pretty much, I think it was 18 kids in our class. I think probably 15 of us applied for a position, and they picked 6 of us to become the sports trainers. So we became all the sports trainers in the first year of the Dockers were all podiatry students. And
funny.
It was great. So we were the inaugural medical staff. And so in our third year as students, we were constantly at the footy club. We were down there for morning training sessions. We were there after uni doing their evening sessions, because at that stage, Freo was like a big amateur footy club. So they would train, some of the guys would work and they'd train after work. So we would get down there, be ready doing all their tapings and massages and running water and all that kind of stuff. So we got this awesome kind of experience in our third year well, mainly in our second year and our third year, but in the third year they were playing games. We were at games, we were doing pre-game stuff, after-game stuff. We went to Melbourne for the first game against Richmond, so we were travelling with the teams and stuff. So it was a great experience to learn to be alongside all these sort of sports medicine people. So that kind of pushed me in a direction. It kind of made me think, maybe sports was the way I wanted to go.
Prior to that, when you decided you were going to do podiatry, and your dad showed you about podiatry in a book, and you read about it, what did you read that made you go, this would be interesting? Obviously, it wasn't just the sports side of things.
No, it wasn't the sports side at all. It was just the healthcare side of it. I thought about physiotherapy at one stage, but I back then didn't quite have the marks to get into physio, and podiatry was just a little bit less. So I was like, I might get into that. And then when I got my results, I wasn't actually sure I'd even get into podiatry. I thought, I might not get the marks. So I thought I'd be a physio teacher instead. But when I got my marks, I just scraped in. I think I was the lowest marks getter. So I just scraped in probably the bottom of the barrel student, which was interesting because I think when we graduated, I think I was the second highest. Yeah. So it was interesting to see how you went across the 3 years.
What do they always say? Where you start is not necessarily where you finish.
That's exactly right. Yeah. And so, in our third year, I was really heavily involved in sport. I still didn't really see myself necessarily going down that path, because I was interested in the surgical program, because we had a surgical training program and there was a few surgeons that were lecturing us, and I always thought, maybe I'd go down that path. But as I got to see more and more of the surgery, I thought, I don't want to be stuck indoors doing this kind of stuff. It didn't really appeal to me. And even just all the risks of infections, post-surgical infections, I thought, I don't want to be lying awake worrying about that kind of stuff. So I thought the sports side of it suited me. And so after 95, I think was when we graduated. So I was only 20 when I graduated. So I think I was probably one of the youngest podiatrists in Australia. I'd gone straight from school. It was a 3-year degree back then. Came out as a 20-year-old. Opened up a little private practice straight away. Just all I did back then was send a whole lot of letters out to all different medical centres and physio places to see if anyone had a room that I could rent. Yeah. And a real dodgy doctor in a suburb not far away from me had this dodgy little office, one old phone. We used to pick the phone up, and if he picked the phone up at the same time, he could be talking to someone. I could hear him talking, and we couldn't make separate calls. It was just a dodgy little place.
But what made you decide to go and work for yourself straight away and not get a job with somebody else, which is what most new graduates would do?
I did both. Okay. So the guy who Ian Lather, who was the physio for the Dockers, he'd given me a job in his private practice. So I was working part-time there. I was working part-time in a public health clinic down in Quinay Community Health Centre, and I set up the practice myself. So I always had this plan that eventually I want to be running my own practice. That was the thing that I felt was probably where I want to go. And so I kind of just had that as a slow burn in the background. So the practice started as a one morning a week thing, and then I just kept working around in all different areas. So I had lots of hats on at that stage. I was still doing a postgrad in the evenings at Curtin. I was working part-time for one private practice. I was working part-time in public health. I had my own practice building away in the background. And then I was working at Freo. So I was really busy. Every night of the week I had something on. I was either at training or at uni, and I worked all throughout the day.
Well, the good part with that too is you were young.
I was
heaps
young,
of
yeah,
energy. And
absolutely.
and I always say that to people. Okay, when you're younger, this is when you can burn the candle at both ends, and it doesn't make any difference
Absolutely.
to you. You
No,
just wake up
that's
the
right.
next day and you just keep going. It's when you
Yeah,
get to our age now, you
you look
burn the
after
candle
yourself
at
better.
both ends. You've got to look after yourself better. Yeah, you
Yeah,
have to do it.
yeah.
You can't do it forever. So I think
No,
do it when you're younger, when you've really got all that
yeah,
energy.
yeah. Yeah, so some of those patients that I started in that little practice years ago, some of them I see their kids now. So like we're talking nearly 30 years later, and their kids, or even the kids that I saw there who were 4 and 5 back then, they're now well into their 30s and have got their own children
Yeah.
and stuff. And so they're still coming through. So it was a little practice, but it was the start of me eventually having my own full-time private practice with extra practitioners and everything in there. Yeah, I guess the public health stuff that I was doing, I was fortunate that it was a pediatric clinic as well. So I wasn't doing lots of routine care. I was fairly fortunate that I was seeing lots of kids, and it was fairly simple. It was kids with flat feet, it was in towers, it was toe walk, and I was seeing lots of it. All the school health nurses were referring it all in. So it was a great experience. In those early days, the majority of my stuff was pediatrics, sports, and then the routine care still in private practice in bits and pieces. So it was a good grounding, I think, that I got a bit of everything early on.
So with your
Um,
private practice, did it ever go full time? Did you ever put all your time into just the private practice?
yeah, I did. What happened then, I carried on doing that for a few years, and it would have been probably about 98, I think I became the podiatrist for the doctors. So instead of just being a trainer, I did 3 years as a trainer. And then as with footy clubs, what happens is coaches move on and staff changes and all the rest of
Yeah.
it. And so the physio, he got bumped out when the coach left, and there was a big shake-up, and there was only 2 of us that were left there from the original trainers that were podiatrists. All the rest had moved off and were working in different places. And I ended up getting asked to take over the podiatry stuff. I was away for a short period, and then I came back because the person they weren't very happy with. They got back in touch with me and said, "Look, can you come over and take over the podiatry?" And at that point, there it was interesting. The medical staff said to me, "Can you just fix the shin splints?" He said, "We've just got all these shin splints." That was the terms, the way he
Yeah.
said it. And he goes, "If that's the only thing you can do when you come back to us, that would be fine." I was like, "Yeah, no problem." So I managed all of that stuff and got that under control, and then dealt with all the issues. And so I stayed there for 7 years, being their podiatrist. And at the same time, I merged into basically just my private, sort of half of my time in my private practice, which was now in a different location, and half of my time as the head of Osborne Park Hospital Podiatry Program, which was a different hospital, it was a bit closer to home. And I was doing basically pediatrics and a little bit of high risk stuff there. So then I was 50-50. At that stage, we were looking at having a family, we were married, and that sort of side of life was coming along.
Yeah.
And
The next step in life.
the
Yes.
next stage, yeah. So then everything had been career, and I'd finished my postgrad, and I'd been doing a bit of lecturing at Curtin Uni as well, in all of that as well. So when I was doing my postgrad, I was lecturing, and then Curtin closed, so that kind of finished. And then so I was basically between the 3 things: Freo, private practice, and public health. And then my first son was born. He was born in November 2004. And by that stage, I was just about over the footy club. I'd sort of done it I'd been there for 10 years. And everything I did was inside the club, which was great. I was around the players in the change rooms doing all that sort of stuff. So I had great experiences, but I was ready to move on. So when Anthony was born, my eldest son, I was like, I think I've done it. I lasted until almost the end of pre-season the following year, which is always the busiest time at Freo. I got through the pre-season, and then I went, okay, I think it's time for me to move on and move into this next phase, which was the family.
When you made that change, when you decided to leave, did you recommend who the next podiatrist would be, or did you leave it up to them?
I recommend it, yeah. So Ian North was one of the other guys that was a trainer with us in the early days. Yeah. And so him and I used to, if ever I was away, he would, if I had to go off somewhere, he would come in and fill in for me, and the club were always really happy with him. And so when I stepped away, I said to him first, "Would you like to take over? Are you interested if they will have you?" And he was like, "Yeah, I'd love to." And so I spoke to the club, but they said, "Yeah, we'd be happy to have him." So he stepped in, and he did almost exactly the same as me. He did 10 years, and then he'd had enough as well. And it's interesting because when I stepped out, I kind of went into this phase then of my life where I had family, I had my private practice, and a bit of public health still work. And then I decided I want to get back into my own kind of sport, because for 10 years, you just spent all your time looking after these other guys and allowing them to achieve what they wanted to do.
Yeah.
and it was time to go, look, I want to do stuff for myself. And so I went on a bit of a extreme sport binge for about 10 or 12 years, where I was doing avant descents and 24-hour adventure races, ultra marathons and all of that kind of stuff. And so I was doing all of that while we had 2 young children. So my wife was pretty supportive to allow me to still do the training stuff for that. But you find ways of doing it. Put the kids to bed at night and then go out cycling for 3 hours and all of that.
So
kind of
when
thing.
you were doing all that though, did you start it because you got to the age where you were putting on weight and you thought, just something to lose weight? Or was it something you'd already seen and gone, that's something I always want to do? And you just
No, I'd never thought I'd end up doing that stuff. So I was playing golf at that time before I finished with the Dockers. So I'd play a bit of golf, but I had put on a bit of weight, not massively, but I was in the car. I could feel the seatbelt getting a bit tighter, so I thought I better do something about this. And then I just started cycling with a mate. That was a start, just like a little 10K ride. And first time I went, I nearly died, but then I just fell in love with that, so I started cycling a lot. And then we started doing row gaining, which is like a long distance orienteering thing at night, or in bush and stuff. So we started doing a bit of that. And then I started running a little bit. And then I did a couple of avant descents, which is a long kayaking whitewater event here. It's like a 130-kilometer paddle race. And so I did a couple of those. And then I thought, I might tie all this together. And adventure racing was a reasonable sort of growing sport here then. And so that's a bit like the Eco Challenge. I don't know whether you saw those kind of things on TV.
Oh, yeah, I have. I've seen that's where you'll jog a certain distance with a canoe or something in it, and then you throw it in the water,
you carry all your gear.
All
that stuff. So you carry all your gear. Yeah, so we did that. And we actually had a team. But there was another podiatrist, the girl who worked with me at Aussie Park Hospital. We had a team from the hospital that did our first 24-hour race. And we ended up doing I think we did about 5, maybe 6 of the 24-hour races over the next 4 or 5 years.
When you're doing these 24-hour races, I've heard your mind goes to some absolutely crazy places.
Yeah, they call it the sleep monsters. And it happens usually about 2, 3 o'clock in the morning when you've been going nonstop. And you just start to see things. And there's another podiatrist who used to do it with us now, who's really big into ultra marathons. He runs massive distances now. And he was yelling at us one night saying, there's a train coming. There's a train coming. And we're going down this track and there's just nothing but bush around us. And he's pointing in the bush, look out for that train. And so he was hallucinating and seeing this train coming through the bush. So it does happen. Yeah, a bit of that goes on. So got into all of that and was working in private practice. And then it was in that time when I went full-time private practice. I think the kids were they just started school. So it was a bit of a tough time. Like I think they were probably year 1 and year 2. We just put them into the local private school. We had school fees coming up. And then the practice where I had my practice, I was in a medical centre. And the doctors who I had a fantastic relationship with still were always that you knew that if they needed the space, you were going to be the first one to go as a podiatrist. That's just the way it was. And so, you know how it works. And eventually it came to the point where I was like, I think I'm going to have to move out. Otherwise I can see the writing on the wall. And so I was kind of looking for a spot. I used to ride my bike to work. And one day I was just riding home and I'd seen that there was this little property in a little shopping centre just around the corner that was up for lease. So I thought I'll ride past, have a look, looked at it, saw it. I was under a bit of pressure to find somewhere. Didn't even go in there, looked through the window, rang the agent, said it was only about 70 square meters. Can I rent this place out? Paid the deposit, got it all done, and then went in and had a look at it. So it wasn't your classic way to scout out a place to put your practice. But it was really close to where I was, and there was nothing else around. So it was like, this will do. And then we fitted it all out. We dug deep into the pockets, spent a whole lot of money fitting the place out. And I made the decision, okay, I'm going to go full-time there now because the costs have gone up and all the rest of it. So it was a bit of a risk because I could have stayed the safe option of staying part-time public health and part-time private practice. But the potential was there. I had a place that I could set up 3 rooms. I could potentially have more podiatrists working there. So I shifted in there. Fortunately, all the patients followed us across, so that was good. And
do you keep doing your adventure racing?
Yep, carried on.
Okay, so you didn't give that away. That's good.
No, I didn't give it up. No, I carried on doing it and carried on probably for another maybe 6 or 7 years with it through that phase. And then we set the practice up and the practice just grew. It just grew and grew. And within no time, we had another podiatrist working. And then eventually my plan was to try and have 2 rooms going basically 5 or 6 days a week, and me being one of those people. And then the plan became, okay, now how can I not be one of those people, so that when I'm ready to sell the practice, it's a more sellable asset. And that's what happened. And then a couple of years ago, one of the girls that worked for me was really keen to buy. And Cass and I, my wife and I, said, I think it's probably a good time. It was a good time for us we thought about getting out for a little while, and it was a good time. I'm just about to turn 50 for Cass, or both of us are. So it was a time where we want to go and travel more and do bits and pieces and not be tied to the practice. So the practice was fantastic to have while we're getting the kids through school, sorting all of our financial type stuff out. But now it's almost seen as, I don't want to be tied to this now. I still want to now be able to go and do other stuff. And that's what we did. So we kind of sold it a couple of years ago. So I work back 2 days a week for it. And we have a great relationship. And it's the first time she's owned a practice. And so she's originally trained in NHS and has come over here. And I actually helped her get her registration back again when I took her on as an employee. And we have a great relationship now. And so my role is not, I go there and I see patients 2 days a week, but I also try and help her to make sure that the practice runs really well, because we don't want to see them fail. We'd like to see them do well. So we help them out, and they've been going well.
Yeah, I think it was a smart thing that you did, that you get to that certain age and you know when it's time.
Yeah.
And you don't, and it's not saying that you can't hang around with your own practice until you're 60, 65. It's really up to you. You can work for as long as you want. But I think I just like the idea of the practice. Yeah, someone that's working there coming in and taking it over. So
take it to the next level.
So the practice just keeps going. It doesn't have to close up.
Yeah, I did say to Kate when she was looking at buying it, I feel like it needs some new energy. It needs somebody to come along who's got a bit more energy than I have now to take it to the next level. And that was what she was keen to do. So it works well. I've also seen too many people hold on and they get right to their retirement age and then they can't sell their practice because everyone just goes, I'll just wait till you leave and then I'll move in next door. And there's that attitude of people. So I think there's a right time to think about getting out, or at least have some sort of succession plan. And,
it's been a common conversation I've had with people recently. And next week's episode is with Jonathan Small. And we are actually talking about that exact thing. That's what the episode's all about, is do you set up a clinic from scratch, or do you buy an existing clinic that's already got patients, that already has cash flow, already has profits, and the benefits of actually doing that for both the practitioner like yourself and for the new person who's actually taking it over?
Yeah.
And I think
a lot depends on what stage you're at.
Yeah, and I think it depends what you've done with your money in the meantime. So obviously you were smart with your money, you've done the right thing with it. So you get to that certain age where you go, I don't have to keep flogging myself silly.
No, exactly.
40, 50 hours a week. Whereas I know other people, they'll work 50 hours a week. Yeah. And they are frightened to death of ever selling their practice or what they're going to do.
Yeah.
And I don't know if they hang on to it because they need the money, or they hang on to it because they're greedy.
Or they don't know what's next. Well, I had that when I sold, there was that whole thing of, okay, well, what am I going to do? Because I'm not ready to retire. I wasn't planning on retiring, but agreeing to work back for 2 days a week was always a good thing both ways, because I was quite happy to stay involved and help out. But shortly after, I'd always been interested in going back to UWA or back to uni. The UWA has now got the podiatry program over here. And in the recent years, without being critical, I felt that our graduates probably weren't doing the things that traditionally podiatrists would do well. I think that I'm not sure what it's like over in the eastern states, but a lot of our podiatrists seem to be becoming overly dependent on technology. So everything had to be treated with laser or shockwave or those kind of things, and they weren't thinking about tissue loading and why a certain tissue was getting aggravated rather than another one, and how they could influence that or change that. Instead, it was just like, we'd put shockwave on it, and that's it. And so I was keen to try and get back to the uni and help them learn a little bit more about biomechanics and tissue repair and tissue healing and tissue loading and tissue stress type theory, that sort of stuff. And so I contacted the union and spoke to them and just said, would you like any help? And they were straight away. Burke, who is the head of the department over here, he was a student of mine years ago. So when I was working at Curtin, I'd lectured him years ago. And so he said, look, we'd love to have you down here. We'd like to have people with a bit more sort of real world experience. So I came in and did a bit of clinical supervision with them. And then now I'm doing some clinical supervising, but also lecturing some of the units. So it's really nice to feel like you're starting to give a little bit back as well, because I'm not a huge networking kind of person. I'm not that kind of person. So throughout my career, I've probably been fairly distant from the profession. I've probably had a lot more influence from sports medicine and from GPs and that kind of, and physios and stuff than I have from podiatrists. I haven't had a lot of contact with other podiatrists. I've just been getting on and getting my practice built, doing all that kind of stuff.
The only thing that made me laugh, the only thing that made me laugh when you said that about networking is the original email that you sent to me talking about what we're going to get to about the semi-custom made orthotics. Yeah. And you said that in one of the last lines.
Yeah.
Your email, he says, unlike you, I've never really been into networking. I went, I don't know how to take that.
That was in a nice way. That's a polite one.
And I said to my wife, I said, never read this. Is that a good or a bad thing? She said, no, he's just saying he's not into it. Unlike you.
Yeah, no, you're really good at it. Like, that's the thing. I've never seen myself as being good at that. I don't do a lot of that stuff. Whereas I admire people like yourself that are really good at that sort of stuff, because it's certainly not a strength of mine.
It's not natural.
Yeah.
This will surprise people, but I am actually a very shy person. I'm an introvert who pretends to be an extrovert.
Yeah. Okay. So you're good at.
I'm good at faking it. I'm just good at faking it in a crowd. Someone hands me a microphone. I was at the Foot and Ankle show in February, walk up on stage, a couple of hundred people there. People could feel what I'm feeling on the inside before I'm starting. It's terrifying.
So you're that duck on the water with the legs going nuts underneath.
Yeah, but once I get going and I get into the rhythm, I'm fine. It's even when I was doing this podcast.
Yeah.
Usually before I actually do the introduction, there's a lot of tension that builds up in me. Like, is this going to be good? Is the episode's going to be fine? How's it all going to go? Is there going to be problems, tech issues? And then once we get going, I totally forget about it.
Yeah. Well, we're probably fairly similar like that, because that's what I'm like as well. Even doing lectures or even in meetings and stuff, if there's lots of people, the bit that I hate is the introduction. I hate it when it goes around the table and they're coming to you and you've got to introduce yourself. That bit is the worst part. I'm the same. I get nervous. Once that's done, I can talk and do all the stuff that I need to talk about.
Yeah. If people ever see me speaking, usually you'll see that I'm wearing a really dark shirt. I would never be wearing this shirt up on stage. It's like a lighter color shirt on. The people that are listening,
because I see you.
Oh, it'd be covered in sweat. Or there would just be sweat marks all over it. People just go, oh my God, it's not that hot. It could be minus 10 degrees. I'll be sweating before I get up. So I'm always usually, even when I run my own workshops, I'm wearing a dark shirt that you can't see that if I was sweating or not. So I've just let out all my secrets.
Yeah, that's right. You have to be careful what you say. You forget that this is being recorded. We don't want to say too much.
No, but I think it's good for people to realize, because I remember I did this. It was a really good lesson I learned. They used to have the Telstra Small Business Awards in Australia. And we won it one year, which surprised us, but we won it. Anyway, after that, the government contacted me and said, "Oh, we want to do. Can you come in and do a talk for this group of allied health professionals in Warwick?" This is going back 20-something years ago. They're becoming too dependent on government handouts. We want to try and encourage them to rely on themselves a bit more, not on the government. Okay, so I'll go in and start this talk. This is one girl back, hated me. I could see it in her eyes. She may as well have held up a note that just says, "I hate you." And I was only about half an hour into it, and I had to stop. And I just went, and I'll tell you, an hour before that, I'm in the car, sweating bullets. I have to go and do this talk. I was feeling sick. I didn't know what was going on. So I stopped. I said, "Look, I've got to stop for a sec." And there's about 20 people there. I went, "Why do you dislike me so much?"
Yeah.
And she went, "Oh, what do you mean?" So I can just tell it's just written across your face that you do not like me, and I can't figure out why. I said, "Do we know each other from a past life? Yeah, what's happening?" She went, "Oh, no, it's just as you're talking, I'm going, well, this is fine for you, but we weren't all born with a silver spoon in their mouth like you." I'm like, oh,
that's harsh.
Oh, that's harsh.
Yeah.
There just happened to be a guy in the room that I knew. And I said, "Hey, Jason." Yeah, I said, "Remember the day my car was getting repossessed?"
Yeah.
when they were hooking up the tow truck and they were about to take away. He goes, "Oh yeah." He said, "But they couldn't because you were sitting on the bonnet of the car." I said, "I know."
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, "So I called the police and said they were trying to steal my car. Their paperwork was fake." And I said to this woman, I said, "I am the furthest thing from born with a silver spoon. Well, I was born with a plastic spoon in my mouth."
Yeah.
And as soon as she heard that, what I learned that day was made me realize to to always remind people remind myself where I came from, but make other people aware that things weren't handed to me. I worked for everything I had.
And I'm exactly the same. Yeah.
I get nervous before I do talks. I get nervous before a podcast.
Yeah.
So when people might see on stage walking around and looking really confident, or they see on the podcast carrying on, I'm no different. We're exactly the same as everybody else.
Yeah. Yeah. It doesn't come naturally always. Yeah.
You know who David Armstrong is, don't you?
The
American. Yeah. I remember him saying to me, and I think it was on the podcast, he actually said that he suffers from imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
If some of the people realize that all these big names, when I've spoken to them, sometimes they've said it on the podcast, some have been off air, they go, "Oh yeah, I feel I have imposter syndrome all the time."
I've felt like that at times, not so much now, but in the early days, I felt like sometimes I'd speak to another health professional on the phone and I'd just get off and think, "Oh man, am I ever going to be able to work in this industry the way that person does? Will I ever know the way he talks and be able to deal with things that way?" And even now, like sometimes one of the best things I find when I'm feeling that way is to go to a podiatry CPD event and listen to the questions that other podiatrists ask. And then I think, "Oh, I'm not so bad after all."
I just go on Facebook and look at some of the questions they ask, and you go, "Oh, geez,
have a look at Bridge of the Gap."
So, somebody's go, "Okay, not the sharpest
and
tool."
Even more so, some of the answers on there can be just as bad. One of the lectures that I give to my students in second semester, I actually quote some stuff off some of those Facebook pages about, and one of them is about a patient asking for advice about an orthotic that didn't go well with the patient. And the way that the conversation goes, I'm reading it just thinking, why would you do any of these things? This is all really damaging to your business. It's also not ethical. There's lots of things that you're not doing well. And how did it get to that stage in the first place? So it's a good way to make yourself feel better about yourself sometimes.
Well, I actually think that's why it's important to have a good network of podiatry friends. So when you do have an intelligent question, even if you don't have an intelligent question, you send emails out to your friends and go, "Hey, what do you think about this?" Or you get on a Zoom call with them, or you phone them up.
Yeah.
You don't post some of those questions on Facebook, because I just look at them.
I agree.
Same thing. I shake my head going, I can understand you asking that question, but do you not have a friend that you can?
That's right. There's better ways to do it.
Yeah.
I think over the years, like even with that Ian who is went carried on the doctors, him and I have kept a good relationship over the years, and a couple of other podiatrists. So I guess I do a little tiny bit of networking, but not a lot, not enough. And my wife says, she said you should do more of this. I'm like, I don't know.
I know, for a shy person, you reached out to me. So
that's right. Yeah, that's true. Yeah.
So I want to jump ahead now. You've had pretty good career. You've had your business. You sold your business. You're working back there part-time, which I think is great. Helping out the universities, helping the next group of people coming through. But you're thinking on orthotics. How did that change?
Yeah, so probably it would be nearly, I would say, probably 10 or more years ago now, I had a distinct shift in the way that we did orthotics in the practice. So traditionally before that, we'd always used custom orthotics, well, not always, but majority of the time used custom orthotics for adults. And for children, we nearly always used off-the-shelf orthotics and modified them accordingly, mainly for the cost of replacing them with kids. It didn't seem like a fair thing to do, I didn't think. But as an adult, I never really felt that for adults we had off-the-shelf orthotics that worked that well. I used to use a lot of the AOLs back in the day, which became the Vasilis, and we would have to grind a lot out of them to make them comfortable. And it just seemed with adults, I'll use custom orthotics. And then about 10 years ago, we started using the SlimFlex range for children, which is the brand that the Algios supplies over here. And I'd use them a lot for kids. And then I just started using them a little bit more for adults. And it came out of a bit of frustration, I guess, maybe a little bit of a lack of control with custom orthotics, but also from the evidence that was around custom orthotics. And that if you look at most research based on custom orthotics versus prefabs, you find that there's not that much difference in terms of outcomes, whether you're looking at research or even my own experience. It didn't seem like there was that much difference in outcomes. And the problem always was that the off-the-shelf ones weren't particularly comfortable for adults, and they never seemed to fit well into shoes and stuff. And so people just didn't like them more for those reasons. And they would gravitate towards customs maybe because they were a bit slimmer and stuff like that. So anyway, there was a few things that happened with labs where I'd have custom orthotics. I had one case where we moved to scanning. So that was the first thing. We moved to digital scanning. And then we had pairs that would come back that were made off exactly the same scan that might be completely different sizes. And there was times where they were centimeters difference. And so I was thinking, maybe this is not quite as precise as I first thought. And I know the labs would argue that they're a lot more accurate than that, but our experience was that wasn't always the case. And with custom orthotics, one of the things that I found was that you would nearly always modify them anyway. So it was very rare that you would get a custom orthotic, give it to a patient, have them walk out of the room comfortable. They would usually be looking at you like you were from another planet at the start, because they take 2 weeks to get used to them. And I never could quite understand that whole idea of going, it's going to take you 2 weeks to get used to them, because then you've lost 2 weeks of treatment for the condition that you're trying to treat while they're getting used to these orthotics. And so I didn't quite like that. But what I was finding was that I was having to modify them anyway. So I thought, if I'm having to modify them anyway, why don't I do it all myself right from the start, rather than having this wait period to get the orthotics from scan, which always seemed excessive. Sometimes it would be 2 weeks before you get them back. And then there might be problems with them and they'd have to repress them. And so you're another 10 days past. And there was times when it just became frustrating. So I started using more of the SlimFlex for adults. And my ability to modify them and get them exactly how I wanted them on the console was really satisfying to me. Is that I could sit there with the patient. In their initial consult, I would do whatever we would normally do, our tapings and that kind of stuff. Follow-up consults, I'd have a pretty good idea what I wanted to do in the orthotic. I could do my assessment, and then I could go, right, I'm going to go and get these done for you now. And I'd walk out of the room with their shoe, have the size that I want to do. I'd know the prescription that I wanted to do, and I'd go and create that prescription on that shell. And then I could come back into the room. I know that I've got it all fitted perfectly into the shoe. They can try it on, and then I can assess their tolerance. And if they find that it's not comfortable, then I can adjust the dosage. So I often talk to patients if I'm talking about orthotics, I'll talk about dosage and tolerance. And so instead of thinking about, like I was traditionally taught in that root theory, where you'd go, okay, you're going to get a big biomechanical assessment form, you're going to create all these numbers, and then you're going to pull out an orthotic script out of it. And I remember seeing all these students and podiatrists that would have biomechanical assessment forms that have all got different numbers on them. But the resulting orthotic was nearly always a 4 mil poly with a 4-degree rear for post.
Exactly the same. They were always the same. We always used to query as a student. We'd say to our lecturers, we've done all these exams. We've got millions of different figures. But why is it always a 3 to 4 degree rear foot? Why? And they go, that's the way it is.
Yeah. And the only thing that would change might be the thickness of the shell or the cover or something like that. And so that, to me, that wasn't real smart biomechanics. So the way I approach it is that I'll work out what tissue it is obviously aggravated, try and work out what factors are leading to that aggravation. And most of those factors are not associated with the orthotic. But of some of those factors, you can't do anything about. It might be their activity. You can get the patient to do things about them. But when I'm focusing on the foot part of it, I'm thinking, okay, what prescription can I add into this neutral shell? So if I think of that orthotic, like that's a typical sort of SlimFlex orthotic, I would think of that as just being the neutral shell, and then I'll add my prescription to it. And so I might be adding medial wedging, lateral forefoot wedging, higher arch, lower arch, plantar fascial accommodations, met domes, whatever I'm doing to them. I can add that to the shell there and then I can shape the orthotic perfectly so it fits perfectly into the shoe. I can make the cover match perfectly, all done on the console. And then what I say to the patient is, like, I've now created an orthotic for you that I think has a therapeutic dose for your condition. Okay, so the orthotic is designed for the condition, as opposed to whether you have a 5-degree rear foot varus or a 2-degree rear foot varus. That doesn't bother me at all. I've designed it for the tissue. And now I want to see how you tolerate it. And so I then get the patient to put it on, and I'll assess their tolerance. And instead of saying, one of my pet hates with orthotics is when I hear patients come in and say, I went back to the podiatrist and told them these orthotics were too uncomfortable, and they told me, no, they are right for you because I scanned or I did whatever, and they are right for you. You just got to get used to them. And to me, that's a failure in podiatry, because I think an uncomfortable orthotic never works. So the way I explain to the patient is that, okay, I've made a dose that I think is therapeutic for you. Now I want to assess how you respond to that dose in much the same way as you would if you went to a GP or a specialist and they gave you a medication. They're going to give you a therapeutic dose for your condition. But if you get side effects from it, they're going to back that dose off. And that's what I think we should do with the orthotic.
Or if it doesn't fix the problem, then they'll increase it.
Then you might build it up. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So what I would do is I come back into the room and go, okay, this is the orthotic. Wear it, see how it feels, and they'll say to me, "Oh, yeah." I say to me, expect it to feel a bit weird, but you should feel like you could go okay with it. And most of the time, these are a really well tolerated orthotic. Most of the time, people go, "Oh, these feel great," especially if they've had other customers before.
Yeah,
they put these in. They go, "Oh, these feel so much more comfortable," mainly because the material's a little bit more tolerable, but also it's been shaped so it sits nicely in the shoe, which is a critical thing. That orthotic shoe interface is something I talk to the students about all the time. It just gets forgotten. And so I get that, how they want it. And then we talk about dosage, like, okay, give it a try now. Let's see how you go. We'll see in a couple of weeks. If it's not doing it, then exactly what you said, we might have to increase the dose. But if it's not comfortable, I'm not going to increase the dose. I'm going to make sure that it's comfortable and then increase the dose if it's not effective. And so that sounds really simple. Like, it's not, I'm sure I'm not saying anything groundbreaking. It's pretty simple, but it allows the patient to understand what's going on better. And it also takes a lot of pressure off the podiatrist, because it's okay to say, well, it's not quite right. I'm happy to adjust it and go up and down a little bit accordingly, as long as your prescription is offloading that tissue. And so,
but one of the things I think you're overlooking though is, I think some podiatrists, they do the scan, they do a cast, wherever they do it, they tick a few boxes. The one I hate is where you hear where podiatrists tick the box, lab discretion.
Yeah.
Okay, they've never seen the patient.
Never seen the patient, no.
They don't know how did you do the cast or the scan, right? And now you're ticking lab discretion. And now the lab has to look at that, interpret whatever it is that they can see, and then have to fill in it. So I think what you're overlooking is unfortunately, I think there's a number of podiatrists that don't think about what they're actually doing. They're prepared to do a cast or scan, send it off, go, just make it up for me, send it back, because what, I'm just going to put it in the shoe and we'll see what happens. Whereas you're actually thinking about the process, you're thinking about the problem, what tissues are being stressed, what you're going to design, what dose you're putting in certain areas, using your terminology. So all you're doing is you're actually thinking about it.
Yeah.
So actually think, if you made a custom-made orthotic with the same thinking.
Oh, exactly. And I could, and that's what I did do. And but with this, I have complete control over it.
And you can do it in the consultation.
And I can do it in the consultation, and the patient can walk out straight away. The advantages from that point of view is, one, that you don't, like I said, you don't lose that potentially 2 weeks of treatment time.
Yeah.
They're getting treated straight away. They're not waiting 2 weeks. So yes, you could tape them in between, but you've still got to do that. Whereas with this, it's in and they're going straight away. So that's a big advantage. But yeah, you do have to, people who tick that box, lab discretion, to me that says, I don't care.
Well, they're probably the same people that will just take a pre-made and go, here, just put that in your shoe, and they don't even do any modifications.
Yeah, that's right.
You want a pre-made, there's your pre-made.
Yeah. I was talking to a few people at the Melbourne State Conference about where we were there with the Aldros people talking about this. And that's something that we're trying to get across, is that with all off-the-shelf orthotics or prefabs, whatever you want to call them, if you just put them straight in the shoe, they'll never work very well, because you've got to think about that shoe orthotic interface. And that's the same with a custom orthotic. If you just whack a custom orthotic on top of a bulky insole and stuff, it doesn't sit in well, you're not going to get a good result. I think as podiatrists, and this was one of the things I was actually talking to my students about yesterday, on Tuesday, was they want to think. Like, I'm telling the students about this stuff, and they love it, because it is them making a decision. I said, what do you want to be? Do you want to be a technician, or do you want to be a clinician? Like, anyone can take a digital scan of a foot. Like, you can pick up an iPhone now and take photos of the foot or do the scanning with the foot. You don't have to be a podiatrist to do that. And so that's not the talent, or that's not the skill that's important. The skill is what you do with it and what prescription you add to it, how you think about what tissues you're offloading, and you think about tolerance of the patient, and you bring all that together to create the right orthotic, as opposed to being able to do a scan. Like, I can teach one of my kids how to do the scan and say, right, anyone can do that. It doesn't make you a podiatrist. So it's
and that's always been the worry too. When I've heard podiatrists have been concerned, I'm concerned that if physios are starting to make orthotics.
Yeah.
And I'm going, well, if you're just doing a scan, ticking lab discretion and sending it off, why can't a physio do exactly the same thing?
Exactly. Yeah.
Do a scan, tick a box, etc. Okay.
Yeah.
So we have the knowledge of the foot better than the physios. So we should be thinking about it more.
Absolutely.
And not just ticking that lab discretion box.
No. I think podiatry's almost been its own worst enemy from that point of view, in that we do complain about other people encroaching on our area. But if we did it really well, we wouldn't have to worry about that. Like, I often hear you talk about podiatrists aren't our competitors, and I 100% agree with that. Like, we don't compete with podiatrists; we compete with other professions that want to take our stuff away. It's interesting, when I was on a state association years ago, and we did a big market research project. This was back in the late 90s. We did a big market research study on podiatry, and it came up with three things, and one of them was podiatrists are not your competitors. You're not competing against podiatrists. You need to lobby government for Medicare funding, because there was none of that back then. And the other one was podiatry needs to market themselves to themselves, because we had a really low self-esteem, almost like a low opinion of our own profession. And so I think we need to say, we are the experts in this area. We know this stuff better than other people. But if we dumb it down, like we have done recently, then we will lose it. Someone else will take it over. And, that technology is a great thing. It's great to have different treatment aspects with technology. But if you become reliant on that technology to do it all for you and you're not thinking, then I think it'll be the death of the profession almost. Like, I think anyone can go, I can whack shockwave on it, take photos with my phone, and then you just have to get used to whatever it is that comes back from the lab.
Yeah.
That's not being a clinician.
So I don't know if I've said it on the podcast recently or on a coaching call, and this will be a little bit controversial. Some podiatrists are going to want to hunt me down. Yeah, they're going to want to hunt me down after this comment. But I actually believe that every podiatrist should understand biomechanics to a certain point. They don't have to be legendary at it, but they need to have a basic understanding of it. And every single patient that comes into their clinic, they should be looking at them at least once every 1 or 2 years, just the biomechanical aspects of the feet. Unless the person's 90 years of age and coming in just to get the toenails cut.
Just the toenail cut. Yeah, that's right. Yeah.
But when I hear podiatrists say, "Oh no, I don't like biomechanics, so I don't do biomechanics," I go, imagine going to your GP and you've been going there for 5 years. You go, you've never checked my heart rate.
That's right.
Never done my blood pressure. And he goes, I'm not really into blood pressure. I don't like doing that. To me, there's basic standards you expect from a general practitioner if they're looking after your health. And I think every patient who sees a podiatrist should get the same quality of care that the podiatrist is seeing, should have a basic understanding of biomechanics, should look at their feet biomechanically. Even if you're only scraping callus off the heels and corns, you should still at least be educating the patient that, hey, do you realize you do have a problem here? You might
there's a
want to do it
biomechanical
yourself.
reason for it.
Yeah, you might go, I don't actually do this work, but a podiatrist I work closely with down the road can actually make something for you.
Help you with it. Yeah. I mean, if somebody comes in, they've got a horrible corn under their fifth MPJ or anywhere, there's a biomechanical reason why that's there, unless it's a smoker's corn or one of the more bizarre type thing. Most of the time, it's a loading issue. It's a manifestation of abnormal loading. And so you can, in most cases, reduce those things by shifting the load. And so that's what we do all the time with orthotics. And I think that's how orthotics work. When you talk about people wondering how orthotics work, I think they shift load around. They change those forces that are acting on different areas. That's how they work. It's that kind of kinetic effect of an orthotic rather than the kinematic effect, which is what I was taught, that you need to see a heel now in a different position when they're on an orthotic. Well, no, we need to change the way the forces are acting on either the tendons or the joint capsule or the skin in the case of the corn. So how can we change that loading effect on those areas? And I think that's how we need to look at orthotics. And Kevin Kirby's stuff is really good like that. He's constantly talking about thinking like an engineer, and thinking forces acting on areas, and that's what we do with this. And you could do it with a custom orthotic, but the beauty of doing with this, it works out. It's a quicker, cheaper, more ethical way of treating it when we know that the evidence shows that there's no great difference between customs and off-the-shelf orthotics. We should be led by the evidence, and so from an ethical point of view, it makes sense to do this stuff, really.
I think people are going to be hunting you down more than me. So.
Well, I'm not saying that they have to do it. I'm just saying that it's an option that is underutilized. I've created a whole lot of videos. So I didn't really get to it before, but when I sold the practice, it turned out that, and I wasn't aware of this. So just before I sold the practice, I spoke to Ian Shaw, who's the managing director of Algios Australia, and I was just happened to ring up to pay my account one day. And he answered the phone and he said, "Oh, Steve, I've been meaning to speak to you." He said, "What are you doing with these SlimFlex orthotics?" And I told him, all the stuff that we just talked about. He goes, "Do you know you are the biggest buyer of these orthotics in Australia in our little practice?" So at my practice, I employed 2 other podiatrists and a couple of receptionists, and we were the biggest buyer of these off-the-shelf orthotics in the whole of Australia. And I was a bit shocked. I was like, "Really?" And he goes, "Yep." He goes, "So what are you doing?" And he came over, and he was over the following year, and he came over and had a look at our lab, and I showed him what we were doing. And he said, "A lot of this stuff happens in the NHS. They use it a lot over there, but there's not many people in Australia that do it." And so when I sold the practice, he said to me, would I help him out to try and show other people how to do this stuff? And so we've created on their YouTube channel, on the Algios Australia YouTube channel, there's I think we've done 18 videos on there that show people how to do all of these modifications. So there's a whole series of step-by-step videos that I'm in. Unfortunately, you don't have to listen to my voice. I did a voiceover by someone who sounds a lot better than me. But you see my hands and me doing all the modifications, and it shows people how to do all these modifications. So if people want to try it out and see how they could at least start, they could just start watching those videos. It shows you how to size up, because sizing needs a little bit different to how you might do it with a custom. So it shows them how to choose the size, shows them how to adjust dosage. There's a couple of videos on that dosage type stuff, and then shows them how to do all the different modifications. So they can go and have a look at it at the Just Australia YouTube page, and it would show them how to do all this kind of stuff.
And I mentioned to you that before we press record, that the first time I'd seen anybody just modify a pre-made shell was back in 1993 when I was in America.
Yeah, it's not new.
Mel Epstein had the company Everflex, and he was saying, well, what's the difference between a customized and a custom-made orthotic? And that was the first time that thinking had been, that I'd heard of someone thinking that way, because to me, it was always just a off-the-shelf or custom-made, not modifying a pre-made insert.
No. Well, we build these as a semi-custom orthotic, and it's a good point you make. Your foot doesn't know how this device got made. It doesn't know whether it got made in a lab or whether you modified an orthotic or what you did. It's about creating a shape that's exerting the right forces on the foot. So how you get there doesn't really matter. And there's a lot of advantages to doing it this way. And from a business point of view, I'm sure your listeners will probably be quite interested in, like, from a business point of view.
I was going to ask you about that side of things.
Yeah. People always ask me and said, well, wouldn't you just be better off doing customs? And our bottom line improved when we went to using semi-customs from using custom orthotics. And the reason for that is because you charge accordingly. Like, it was always a process of people going, oh, well, if they're semi-custom or if they're an off-the-shelf orthotic, I'm only going to charge $40 or $60 or whatever it is for them, whatever people would charge a really low amount. But we just go, well, no, this is now a semi-custom orthotic. And so we would charge the patient their consult fee. Plus, maybe I think they vary now from about $140 to, maybe $160, $170, depending on how many modifications we've done. And that's a pretty cheap price. I'm sure people could charge more if they want to. But there are people charging, and we've got people around here charging $1,200 now for custom orthotics. So even if I was going to be charging $300 for these, patients would go, this is so much cheaper. And one of the things I never had happen when I was doing custom orthotics was no one ever walked back in, or maybe a few people did, but over the years, not many people came in and said, oh, can you just do me another 2 pairs? That very rarely happens. Whereas with these, I can spend an afternoon and I might see in my afternoon, I might have, say, 12 people or whatever I'm seeing. 6 of them will probably be people just coming back and just going, can you do me another pair? Or they'll bring in 2 pairs of shoes and they'll go, look,
Okay.
I just want to move all these shoes because I don't want to move them around anymore. And so it's actually quite a nice way to work because they're just telling me what they want. I go in, do another pair for them, and out they go.
So as you're doing the modifications on these things, have you already got other pre-made parts that you're sticking together so it's always easy to duplicate it?
No, so basically I just have the materials that I have is I have EVA, I have neoprene, and then I have pre-made met domes and those kind of things. But most of the modifications are wedges. Like that's most of what podiatry is medial wedging or lateral wedging, your razors, all that kind of stuff. And I will just cut EVA, stick it and grind it. And that way you get a much nicer finish. Like if you use the pre-formed stick-on pieces, I've always found they just slip around. Eventually they move and it not only does it not look particularly professional, they move off and they slide and they're not as effective. So everything we do is glued in it. It comes out looking like a lab orthotic. Okay. So it's not just a bits and pieces stuck on. Our finished product looks like a lab orthotic. And if you look at those videos, you'll see them on there. They look like a lab style orthotic by the time it's all been done. So that's important as well. Like as much as it's not necessarily important to the outcome, it's important to the patient. Like it needs, if you're going to charge for a professional product, it needs to look professional. So that's when we've had people come in, that when I have other people come work for us, I show them how to do all this stuff and I make sure that they have a professional finish to it. If it's not, I don't want it going out looking shabby, even if it's going to work. I still want it to look professional because it's a reflection on your practice and it's a reflection on the profession overall. I think that those things need to look good. So,
well, I reckon you've got people thinking. And that's the idea of this podcast, to make people feel, see, and think differently about the podiatry profession. And I think this particular topic, and I've said to you, like I did custom-made ones when I had my clinic. I had my own milling machine on site. So I could see the patient, design the orthotic, get it milled out, and I could do all this within an hour quite easily. So
it's a bit different if you're doing it that way.
Yeah, I had very, very few problems ever fitting custom-made orthotics. So it worked really well for me because of the setup that I eventually created. But I remember when I used to send things off to labs, and after I sold my clinic, I know the podiatrists there had stopped making them on site and started using the lab that the big head office told them they had to use. It's some of the dodgy crap. I'd be in the clinic there and I'd see some of the dodgy things coming through. And I'd look at them and go, they're awful. They are awful looking orthotics. And then they would have to modify the absolute crap out of these things to try and get them to fit into a shoe. And the orthotic hardly even resembled and the podiatrist used to say to me again, this is the one that we made ourselves when we had the milling machine. We got another one made for the patient, sending them off to, I won't mention the lab. They go, have a look at these. And I went, oh, they're terrible. And the material was, everything about them was off.
Yeah. Well, I guess what you were doing is kind of similar to what we do, really. But you're doing it as a milled orthotic. So you're getting your shape exactly how you want it.
Yeah.
But you're using a milling machine. I've just gone, well, I'm just going to use that as my starting point. So instead of having it milled, I'm going to grab that as my starting point and then add my things to it and produce the shape exactly as I want. Because after all, that's all we're doing. We're just producing a shape. And so what we probably both had is that same frustration of waiting for it to come back and then it not being what you want always when you come back. And so it takes that out of it. And the other thing I probably didn't say was that when we did the custom orthotics, what we would find is that you would have periods of free or included visits for your reviews and stuff. With this, the patient doesn't see their treatment as just being the orthotic. That's what I want them to see. This is just a part of their treatment. So the orthotic becomes a part of their treatment program because it doesn't make up the vast cost of their program. So when they come back for their follow-up visits, all of that's just billed accordingly as well. So we'd never have any of those flat spots in your cash flow where you're going, okay, I've done 4 reviews today or something like that nothing's come in for. You just have that more constant cash flow. And so I think that's what probably really improved our bottom line as well, was that you didn't have those other visits. Because for me, if I've provided someone with an orthotic that they've paid a substantial amount of money for, and then it's not comfortable and you're having to do those other bits and pieces afterwards, I never felt very comfortable charging people for that type of thing, because I feel like I would have an obligation to make sure it was comfortable if I'm providing this thing for them. Yeah, whereas this way, this way, I know that that's sorted out. I can have that done right from the start. So their ongoing visits are all just billed accordingly. So I think that probably was one of the things that made a big difference in our bottom line as well. So, yeah.
Yeah. When I was in the UK, I was talking to a couple of people that had the 3D printing of orthotics. And there was one particular machine I was talking to Kieran, and I was looking at his, and he said, because you can make them too, 3D printed so cheap.
Yeah.
You can make them a certain way and then replace them with a different device and replace them again as part of it, as part of an overall treatment plan. Instead of it's like, you're going to pay an arm and a leg for this one pair of orthotics. This is your custom-made pair. And
treat them like gold. Be careful you don't lose them.
Treat them like gold, don't lose them. Whereas because with the 3D printing, they can make them cheaper. They can make it a number of devices that the person can wear as a progression as time goes on. And I thought that was a really unique idea as well. Yeah.
Well, a pair of the SlimFlex orthotics, if you're buying them from Maljoss, they're about $13 or $14 a pair. So they're not expensive at all. Yeah, they're really reasonable priced orthotic. So when you add a couple of modifications on it, it's probably going to cost you maybe $20 for the device. And so I would be buying these in boxes of hundreds of them. And when you think of what you're paying for that compared to what it would cost me in lab fees to make up 4 or 5 pairs of orthotics, there's a massive difference in what you're outlaying for what you're getting back. And so from a business point of view, it actually made a lot of sense. Like, people probably they might not believe me, but it actually did. It made a lot of sense because there's quite a decent markup when you add on your consult and the cost of the orthotic. And then your ongoing visits afterwards.
Yeah. Well, if you take into account, I'm not sure what people are charging for orthotics these days. Everyone is a bit different. But I know a lot of lab fees are around $120, $140, $160, depending on what they're doing. They're waiting. And I did a poll in the Podiatry Business Owners Club on Facebook about 2 months ago about how long people are waiting for their orthotics. Yeah. And majority, 80%, was still over 1 week before they got the orthotics back.
Yeah, it's crazy. Yeah.
And so I can see the advantage of getting something on a patient faster.
Yeah. And we all know
you may not be making that big chunk of money when you're fitting the orthotic, but you're still making some good money, but you're also getting paid for your visits.
That's right. Along. You're getting that ongoing business. And the other thing that you get is you get lots of repeat custom where people just go, I want another one of these. Yeah. I have people referring from all over the place for this, just for these orthotics now. And that didn't happen before. People a patient will come from an area that's quite a long way away from our practice, and then all of a sudden I have all these referrals coming from that area because the people see it as a real value for money, but from our point of view, we're doing really well out of it. So everybody's doing well out of it. Whereas too often with custom orthotics, you feel like maybe the podiatrist is doing better out of this than anybody else, which from a business point of view is probably not a bad thing, but from a professional point of view, it's not always the case. Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that people do custom orthotics badly all the time, because lots of people do really well with custom orthotics. So I know people will get on and have a go at me about it, but I'm not saying that. I'm just saying as an alternative, it's something that people can consider.
No, like I said, when you sent me the email and you first mentioned this, I'm going, ooh, this is a bit controversial.
Yeah.
But then the more I thought about it and the more I looked into it, and I'd spoken to some other people, and even next week's episode, we touch on this subject again, just about very briefly, not into as much detail. But I know there's a lot of podiatrists that are in towns where it's only a really small little town in the middle of nowhere, or they go and visit these different places. And I know that this is what they do. They take a pre-made, they modify it, they fit it on these different people again because it's
just works
faster. And they might have people that are traveling 400-500 kilometers to come and see them. They can't come back in 2 weeks. And
no, exactly.
Just posting up a pair of orthotics and sending it out to them isn't always the best way either. You can see the benefits where this can work really well in certain practice, but also from a business standpoint, I can see business-wise how either way can work well if you're doing it right.
Yeah. It's interesting. When we were at the Melbourne State Conference, Anthony from the University of Newcastle, I can't think of his surname right now, but he did a presentation there, and we were there with Aljoss and just there to show people this stuff. And he just did this presentation on using exactly these devices in kids with juvenile arthritis. And he'd done a research article. We didn't even know he was going to be there. And Ian from Aljoss had a good chat with him, and we ended up catching up with him just recently. And Anthony came and saw me, and he said, it's great to see somebody else doing this stuff, because he's lecturing at Newcastle. And he says, I do this stuff all the time. He said, I do it in practice, but I didn't think anyone else did it. And he goes, I thought I was the only podiatrist doing this stuff. And he says, it's great to see what you're doing. He said, could you come and help us with our students? And so just recently I went over to Newcastle and did a session, a full day workshop with their third year students over there, just showing them how to do all of this stuff. And it's great to get it into the students, because I think it's a bit of a dying art. Like I think a lot of people just have forgotten how to do even reposting a custom orthotic. People just send them to the lab all the time now, whereas that should be a very simple, easy process. You should be able to whack a bit of EVA on there, grind it to the angle, and give it back to the patient on the day. But that stuff seems to be a bit of a dying art. So one of my things that I'm keen to do, which I'm doing at UWA, is just getting the students thinking this way as well. If they choose to apply these principles to custom orthotics, that's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. It's the same principles. It's just another way of doing it.
I remember having students come and do placements, or if we employed a new graduate and they come into my clinic, they come into the lab area and they go, oh, where do you keep your met domes? Because they're so used to everything being pre-made. And I'd hand them one and I go, now what I want you to do, see that one there? I said, I know it looks like it was done by a machine. I said, but I am a machine. I said, I did it.
You did it too. Yeah, okay. Just ground it out of forum.
In between your patients, I want you to come out here, and today, between every patient, all I want you to do is make met domes today.
Yeah.
Okay.
And I bet they rolled their eyes.
And they looked at me and went, oh, but wouldn't it be easy if we just bought them? I went, no, because that way you can modify the size, whatever you want. So it's a small, medium, large. I said, and after you do met domes, we're going to get you to do a PMP with the U to the second. And then PMP with a wing to the fifth. And I would actually, this was part of their training. They had to be able to make these things.
Well, it's funny you say that.
Look like it was done by a machine. I mean, it's so smooth, not little hacked out little grinding marks. God,
it's funny you say that. On Tuesday, I was with the students at UWA. I was doing the same thing, but with felt, and just showing them. This is final year students. I'm like, make me a PMP, and they're like, oh, I can do that easy. And then I show them, okay, this is how you do it, and bevel it. And then they try and do it, and they've just told me, oh no, we can do that stuff easily. But they know how to do it, but they just don't practice the practical skill enough of being able to do it to a level that when you then go into practice, you look really professional and you do a really good job of it. So learning those skills is important.
Just something I was going to grab. This is the one thing I used to say to every person that worked with me. I will provide all your instruments. You don't need to worry about any of that. I provide everything. But the only thing you need to go and buy is yourself a good pair of scissors.
Yeah.
Don't go and buy some
cheap
ass ones.
Good pair of shippers. Yeah, good pair of shippers, those ones.
These ones?
Yeah.
I don't know if it'll pick up the sound effects, but I got these, it must have been 30 years ago, and I paid about $140 for them at the time.
Yeah.
They have never been sharpened and they have never gone blunt.
Yeah. And
they are absolutely fantastic. German stainless steel.
Yeah. Is it shippers? It looks like it. Looks like shippers.
Westminster.
Oh yeah. They were the brand. It was Schiffer and Westminster were the two brands, I think.
Yeah, and
back in the day. Yep.
Surprising how many new graduates to come and work with me. I tell them this is all you need to get. Make sure you get good scissors, and they turn up with these $6.99 pair of scissors that they got from Coles.
Yeah,
and I watch them trying to cut felt, and I'd sit there just going, these things cut through felt like butter.
Beautifully, yeah, exactly. Yeah,
and I'd just be shaking my head, going,
and that's that.
Because they didn't do
old school podiatry, isn't it? That we need to make sure that we're keeping in the profession, because I do fear sometimes that those skills are the ones that are just disappearing, and they're what set us aside. Yeah,
they come in and go, show me how you do strapping for lateral ankle sprain.
Yeah,
and I'd be watching them do it, and I'd just sit there shaking my head, going, "Come on, seriously." Yeah. They couldn't do basic strapping. They couldn't do basic padding and strapping, and like, I don't know if they still do it at the university or it's just a dying art.
I spent all day Tuesday doing it with my students, so it's
fun.
My Tuesday session starts off with scalpel practice, and then we always finish with taping and padding practice, and that stuff's become, I think, it's critical. Like, it's always been such an important part of podiatry. and trying to make sure that it stays in there, I think, is important, because I don't want it to be replaced by technology. I don't want to be a dinosaur, but I want to make sure that we do keep those things in the profession.
Yeah, no, I agree with you 100%. So, Steve, I think we're going to have to wrap up, because otherwise you're going to break the record, and Dave James will get upset if we end up doing the longest episode than his.
Fair enough.
So,
I've got a golf game to get to as well. So,
priorities. So this has been, I've really enjoyed this conversation. This has been fun.
Yeah,
I hope everyone that's listening to it, it's got you thinking about it, about how can you apply this. And maybe there's certain patients where this will be perfect, and other ones where you'll still do custom-made devices.
Yeah.
I think bottom line, it comes down to, like you were talking about, what ethically is the right thing to do, and what's the best thing for the patient, and are you fixing problems?
Exactly. Yeah. It's always, if you always say to my staff, as long as you're doing the best thing by the patient in every way, then you'll never go wrong.
That's a great way to finish. So thank you very much, Steve.
No worries. Thanks, mate.